Hello, FPL managers. Welcome to the 49th episode of the FPL Optimized podcast. This is the podcast in which we combine analytics with the good old eye test. I am your host, Sertalp, and my casual manager co host, Bas, is enjoying a well deserved vacation. Data or grass, or data and grass? That's the question. Thanks for tuning in again. After debating a lot whether we should be back for the new season or not with Buzz, we have decided to give it another try. And once we have decided to do it, Buzz immediately said he's leaving for vacation and he won't be here. So I should probably record an episode or two by myself. And it gave me the golden opportunity to bring more analytics focus managers as guests. Today, I will be joined by a true master of FPL in terms of analytics, none other than the number one ranked manager in massive data rankings, Jonny Currie. Johnny also finished FPL in top 1K, 909. Do I remember correctly? A
Think
truly
so.
amazing feat. As far as I know, Johnny is not doing analytics for a living, but some of you might be wondering how he's topping the charts in FPL. Well, let me tell you, Johnny, also known as FPL Spaceman, has taken the art of decision making to a whole new level. We will try to learn his secrets, strategies, and how he uses the data into a winning FPL team. Whether you're a veteran FPL manager or a newcomer, to learn the ropes. I believe Johnny will give us some great insights today, or that's at least what I'm hoping. Before we dive into the world of FPL analytics, let's know our extraordinary guest a bit. Johnny, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Sertalp. It's weird hearing you say data or grass or data and grass instead of Bass saying it, but yes, good to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. And as far as I know, you do UX design for a living. So I'm a little bit curious, how did you end up playing FPL with analytics in the first place? So how did you start playing FPL and how did you become an analytics convert?
Yeah, so I'd played FPL for quite a while, and I remember playing it was like Match Magazine um, fantasy, like way back when I was, I don't know, 10 or 11, and I wasn't that good at it. I just you played, friends played. So my first concept of fantasy football was just like playing with your friends and like the mini leagues, and I knew that someone won overall, but I didn't really like have a concept of, oh, I should try and finish top 50k or 100k. I was like, I just want to beat my friends at it. So then I started watching a bit of YouTube content a few years ago, which was just more like sort of helping narrow the short list of players I was looking to pick from. So I'm not doing anything stupid or or suboptimal, I guess is what we'd say now.
Yeah.
So it's like sufficiently good a move if I was considering it, and it's like they're all talking about how he's going to get dropped, or he's playing further back or that kind of thing. Then I'd pick a few things up like that. But generally, it was just like trying to pick players who I thought would do well and drop the players who've got injured or not playing and that kind of thing. And did all right. I had some top 100k finishes, and I had a few good close battles with some of my friends. I remember
Hmm.
one that went down to the last day of the season, and we tied on points overall. And actually, it was the season when the Man United Bournemouth game got moved on the last day of the season to the Tuesday because of the bomb scare. So like we went into that game knowing that there was like a 5 point gap, and it was like Valencia versus Rashford or something, and Valencia got an assist right at the end, which got him 2 bonus, caught 5 points on Rashford, level on points, didn't know what happened. Then updates the next day and it said I'd won because I'd done one less transfer or something. So I didn't really know what I was doing.
Oh.
Yeah, we didn't know. We just like, oh, I've done fewer transfers. So yeah, that was fun. But like if we'd finished 200k, I wouldn't really have known. And then getting a bit more into the community, I found like FPL Twitter. I'd found accounts like you and FPL Kiwi and FPL Review and Simon, who were talking more about using analytics for
Hmm.
um, predicting points and picking your team, and actually like I guess the concept of bookies odds being something that could kind of roughly reflect reality, or at least like the average case, or they're not going to be way off. So if I think that one player is going to score and the bookies are saying something completely different, then I should probably rethink it. And then I'd already done some like math statsy stuff in athletics. I used to do track and field.
Mhm.
And there's like a lot of data. There's like ranking systems for who's run the quickest time, who's won the most races, that kind of thing. And I used to do like a bit of stuff with that, quite rudimentary, just like I guess most people kind of just was like, oh, Jonny can remember the rankings, or I know that they ran this time on this day and that kind of thing. So I wasn't actually doing anything super clever with it. But I was interested in stats. I've done maths as like my degree at uni. So then I built my own model a couple of seasons ago, just to get a feel for like how does a model work. So if I try and build my own, then like I can build something really simple and go, well, I know what the deficiencies are here. I know what's in it. So some models will like take penalties out, and then I'll go, okay, well, like I've not added penalties in, so I can mentally adjust the penalties
Mhm.
bit. Or I
Mhm.
know I haven't accounted for someone playing out of position, so I'll do that mentally. So it's just like baseline metrics.
Mhm.
And then I realized that my model just wasn't as good as the ones that are available. So I stopped. It was getting clunky, and I stopped using it. I was like, oh, I'll use other models that are better than mine. And found your stuff on like optimization solvers, and worked a bit on that and stuff from you and Trout and lots of other people in the community. Found the Discord server that you run, and got chatting with a lot of like-minded managers. And now that's kind of how I play fantasy, is actually like talking with these other like-minded managers and playing in this kind of way, and actually like kind of half playing for data, and then separately I have some players who are playing football at the weekend that I can support, and I almost kind of view it as like two different games. It's like
Mhm.
I pick the best fantasy football team, and then the reason fantasy football is a game is because it's to drive engagement for the Premier League.
Yeah.
So, and I watch the Premier League, and I'll watch a game I might not have watched, and I go, I've got this player as a result of the other game that I played,
Mhm.
and then I want to cheer them on. But if they don't play well, then fine, whatever. Which was the same with like Formula One fantasy. I played last year as well. Didn't
Mhm.
know too much about it. Recently got into F1, and it just meant I had some drivers I was supporting. So yeah, that's kind of the fantasy football journey, but more analyticsy recently, and yeah, it's a good community to be a part of. And
Yeah. Awesome. I think developing your own model and then eventually giving up is almost like a requirement for to become
yeah,
a true analytics manager. Like every one of us, I think, tried building a model at one point and then gave up and said that okay, some others are already doing it, so I will just follow it. Well, that's great. So then your transition of well, not exactly using analytics to the degree of maybe like prediction models and optimization to now that you are using them. So was it a like slow transition, or did you change like over a season? Did you say that okay, this season I will just follow the data a little bit more closely?
yeah. I think the season I built my model, I didn't run it the whole season. Even I
Hmm.
ran it up to the point when like double game weeks came in, and I realized that the way I'd built it, it just couldn't
Oh,
really do double game weeks. And I was like, oh,
yeah.
let's like rebuild it or fudge around it, or just this. I could do blanks. I could just like just give someone zero. But trying to like add two games together, because I built it in like Google Sheets. I wasn't even building it in like proper code or anything. And I was like, oh, like I hadn't thought about this point. So partway, that's when I was like, okay, well, I can use it, and I'm helping my decision making, but I'll use other models. Someone else has built one that's got double game weeks built in, which is a fairly key part of the game. So I think that season was my first, like, I think that was 2 seasons ago, maybe last season, was my first season of like playing with data rather than
Hmm.
just like picking players that I thought would be good and maybe like checking the form on the website or
Hmm.
stats there, or going like, well, actually, like this guy's play, checking stuff. There's stuff on the website. There's statistics. It's like statistics isn't like black and white. Like a
Yeah.
goal is a statistic. They award points for stats. It's a
Yeah.
much
Yeah.
more rudimentary stat.
Just true.
So if you're trying to predict goals, you can use goals. You can use expected goals. You can use a complicated finishing model on top of it. You're just layering it up further and further.
Exactly.
I was using very rudimentary stuff. I was just like, who scored some goals?
Yeah.
Oh, this guy's playing up front. I'll pick him. And then that season, I was like going, okay, like the data is suggesting this player, and I might not
Hmm.
have thought about them. So I'll start making picks where I hadn't considered it, but the data had suggested it. I remember Lewis Dunk being one that my model loved, and being really excited about, like, I've got to buy Lewis Dunk. He wasn't super popular, and I think in the end I realized I'd made an error, and I was giving him like 3 bonus every game or something silly.
Oh.
I'd done something wrong. I'd like doubled his bonus by mistake, so he wasn't as good as my model thought he was. Whereas this season was the first one where I kind of went like, okay, like the data rankings are almost a mini game to play for. Like, I remember last summer kind of thinking like, not I'm not going to care about the overall, but I was like, if I can just play the data as well as I can and
Hmm.
see what happens, then I remember describing it with one of my other friends. Was like, well, it's almost like, um, if I can create enough expected goals worth of chances by like eking out more and more minutes
Mhm.
on the pitch, more chances than my friend who's like better at picking up things with the eye test and spotting that this guy's getting in the right position, so I'm going to pick him. If I can get enough more expected goals, enough more EV out,
Mhm.
then it doesn't matter, or it doesn't matter as much how much I'm like converting that to real points.
Mm. Okay.
Like, so he was like, oh, so you're playing like Darwin almost. Like, I will create loads of expected goals, or I'll try to, and if I can do that successfully, even if I'm missing some, I'm going to beat people who are like overperforming, but their expected value is lower.
Yeah.
Well, that was the theory. So I was like, well, if I can get a really high data ranking, then it's unlikely I'll have a really bad season. I might
Yeah.
still get unlucky, and there are some people who were like below 50% unluck in the top 10k.
Mhm.
Um, and actually, like my variance wasn't super high. It was like, well, technically, I was the unluckiest manager in the top 1k.
Mm.
I still got a bit lucky, and actually, the data I was getting lucky. But like in terms of conversion from
Yeah.
EV to points, I wasn't getting as lucky as these top guys, but because I generated enough
Mhm.
underlying data, then I was gonna hopefully finish. And that was kind of the theory. So this season was the first one where I was like all in on the data, so to speak.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Actually, it was one of the questions we have received. Sambada FPL asked if you
Yeah.
have aimed to have a good MD rank or it just happened. So, from your answer, I understand that you kind of thought that if you get a good MD rank or if you maximize your expected value, then you will hopefully do better in FPL too, right? So you were always aiming to get a good rank in MD.
Yeah, I think so. I think like it was kind of halfway in between. I think towards the end, once I realized that like I could win, then
Mm.
that's when I was like, well, I'll just go for MD1. Like it's variance enough anyway. My rank
Mhm.
was already like high enough to be a PB. I don't really care where I finished within the top whatever. I wasn't going to win, and I wasn't going to drop outside the top 10k unless I had a stinker. So I was like, I might as well go for MD1 and see what happens. And actually, like, I didn't really make any different decisions than I thought I would compared to if I'd been going for overall rank. But it was in my head. I was like, okay, like I might as well try and win this. Whereas throughout the season, it was more like I want to just do as well as I can on the MD rankings, and I still care about the overall rank. Like if you pick a really good player and they miss 3 penalties, you're
Mhm.
still annoyed, even if you go, well,
Yeah.
like, well, great, I've picked the player on penalties and he's got the penalties. That was good. But there's also the level of, well, he didn't score them, so that's bad. But like I made a good decision, but the outcome wasn't so good. So I was using the MD to kind of like check, like, is my decision making process effective here? And
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things the review talks about it. The gap between 1 and 100 MD, and actually anywhere in the top, well, depending on your target,
Yeah.
top 500, top 1000, like it doesn't really make a huge difference. You're just got to be like sufficiently good or sufficiently high. So I wasn't like I must win, but I was like I'd like to get sufficiently high enough that I can say I've had a good season.
Mhm.
And there's luck involved as well. I remember picking like triple Man United on um, the post World Cup wild card, and
Mhm.
actually like I thought, well, we might get the double dropping, so I'll hedge my bets that way, and it did drop. So
Yeah.
then I'm in a better position.
Mhm.
Whereas if it hadn't dropped, it dropped later. Like that dropped well for me, which meant I already had the doublers, which meant I then had the opportunity to like make transfers outside of those Man United players, which other
Yeah.
people were using on buying Man United players, things like that. So you
Yeah.
still get lucky even in the accumulation of massive data.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I'd like everyone wants a good overall rank. That's like I don't want to win my mini leagues. I just saw going for a high massive data ranking as a way to try and do that.
Yeah. I think yeah, massive data ranking is good in terms of like it's giving you also another uh like alternative metric to aim for, because if
Mm,
your season is not going well, especially, I mean, if it is going well like yours, I mean, it's not a huge issue. But if your season is not going well, if your variance is very quite negative, like if you are below, way below 50% variance, then MD rank is at least giving you the sense that you did everything you could probably, and you can even improve your MD rank, like if you keep playing. I think for myself, the one of the most annoying thing was I sacrificed some expected value, hoping that I will, get a good return in FPL at least, and then it didn't happen. So it impacted my, you know, actual FPL season and also MD rank. So those game weeks are the worst.
yeah,
But
so
yeah,
you get the
overall,
double whammy. Whereas at least
yeah,
when I
totally.
went like, oh, it was close, and I picked the one that was marginally higher
Hmm.
EV, and it doesn't work, and I go, well, I had a reason for doing that,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
you
that's
win
true.
on one metric, and
Yeah,
so you win on one or maybe both. Whereas if you pick some slightly lower EV, you might have a very good reason for it, but like
yeah.
you could have the double loss.
Yeah. Okay.
Um,
So my next question is actually kind of related to that. Um, so FPL Thomas Jones asked, how loyal were you to FPL reviews' most optimal algorithm picks each week? If not 100%, what variables did you consider and change? So I'm just hoping to learn, when you realize that you can actually finish massive data ranking as in number one spot, um, did you follow just FBI reviews recommendations, or did you consider something else on the side? Like he asked.
um, well, I think most of the time I wasn't actually using. I was more using the Python optimization solver that
Hmm.
we've built as mainly you as a community. Um, I haven't contributed to it more so than actually review website itself. It's still useful, and actually, I can operate it on my phone, so I can just check a few things. But I think what I feel like some people misunderstand about review and optimal
Hmm.
is that it's kind of just like a snapshot of that moment in time.
Yeah.
So I think I even did like a race chart graph. I don't think I put this on Twitter. It was in the Discord server leading up to free hit 32, which everyone was playing.
Hmm.
And I like took the EV every half an hour or so through the day and then like plotted it out. And actually the optimal team changed all the time through the day. So depending
Yeah,
on when you logged on to pick your team, you're gonna have a
that's
different.
true.
If you go optimal free hit team, it's going to be different because it's changing, because sentiments are changing, and news comes out. So actually, what what the review site shows when you press, depending on all your settings as well, like what have
Hmm.
you picked for free transfer value, what have you picked for everything, um, decay, all that sort of thing, your own X minutes that you can input and change and say, I think this guy's going to play or I don't think he is. Then even then, when you press, calculate the optimal move under all of these conditions, that's still a snapshot of
Yeah.
the reality. The reality is dynamic. It's like I kind of look at it like an ecosystem.
Hmm.
So I would try and like tinker with the ecosystem and like break it and see what's going to like robustly hold up.
Yeah.
So I did a lot of like sensitivity analysis, which I think one of the other questions is about. Maybe we can cover in more
Hmm.
detail there. To kind of go like, okay, maybe um I think Martial Bruno Fernandez is another one that came up. Was like actually Martial's predictions were a little bit higher, but like, is it greedy to try and take that EV now, but potentially like, well, Martial's injury prone. He wasn't necessarily even going to play that double game week, let alone
Yeah.
further on. And your team might be really well set up to account for that kind of punt. You might have everything set up, and you go, okay, I can afford to try and grab this
Hmm.
Martial. But to try and understand that, you can try and play with things, or you can change X minutes and go like, okay, like this might be the top one here, but let's say I've also got Reece James, and let's say Reece James gets injured this game week. Like, does my team struggle, or does my team kind of cope with it? So if your team's going to really struggle to cope with this punt because you've got another punt who might restructure, maybe
Hmm.
maybe that means that you just change those both out and there's two viable alternatives below it. But it's not just like who's the top pick, it's like who's below him, how does that affect your team structure, what happens if this goes wrong. um don't be like, the algorithm is going to be greedy. A computer
Yeah.
doesn't think like this. The computer just goes top pick by
Hmm.
0.01, so I'll take him, or point 0.1 or whatever, or whatever you think. You might even just have your own intuition of, I think this player Martial could score a hat trick. It's like, well, he could, yeah, but like, if your team can't cope with him getting injured instead of scoring the hat trick, then the gamble is huge because the loss is massive, even though the gain might be massive. So it wasn't always just logging on half an hour to go and pressing click. It was like through the week, kind of testing out the waters and like, what happens if this guy comes back, or what happens if this guy moves out of position, or this guy gets
Hmm.
penalties, or these guys' minutes drop, or that kind of thing, and actually just testing out what's robust, what can I break, what's going to hold up to the most possible scenarios. And especially with like the double game weeks, when we're like, we've got uncertainty on those. What if the double drops in here? What if it doesn't? What if this game gets postponed? And the more you can test it and go like, this player, this move is robust to all of these decisions, then you're more likely to be sufficiently high on the MD. It's not having the top MD every week. It's
Yeah.
like never tanking, never having a disastrous fall apart.
Yeah.
Um, it's kind of, so. I guess I mean the variables are X minutes as well, so that's one of the things. The defaults are very good, but I think the variables I'll try and pick in is like, what happens in the scenario that something goes wrong.
Hmm.
So, because there's so many of those, and I can't think through all of them. I don't have
Yeah.
the cognitive load to do that. That's where the computers are good, because you go, I've thought of 4 or 5 somewhat unlikely but plausible scenarios. What happens to my team in each of those? And you ask the computer, and it'll tell you, to a degree. So it's a tool. It's not something to tell you what to do. You can do quite well if you just take the top pick with half an hour before the deadline each week. You'll do pretty well. But if you want to do better than that, then you need to like use it rather than just take the default.
Yeah, it's funny because the progress of things is like people were playing FPL without help of data, or I should say maybe advanced analytics, and then there came to a point where people started using prediction data and also this kind of like algorithms or maybe like solvers so that they can simplify things a little bit. And then we realized that, okay, it's not enough to run the algorithm and get one squad. You need to get multiple of them and consider, what will happen. If a player is injured or he gets rotated, or maybe a double game week uh, appeared in the schedule now. So yeah, now it feels like, we went through that phase, like we were kind of like reducing our workload so that you can just run the algorithm and get the solution, but then now
There's
it's
more.
arrived to a point that we are still working as much as we
Yeah,
were
yeah.
originally, but it's a different kind of work now.
It's interesting though, and I think like I find that fun. That's
It
what
is,
some
yeah.
people don't. And the other thing with the snapshot thing is like, the EV projections are like an average. So like, this
Yes.
is the baseline. So someone like Edison, for example, like if you take out saves and everything and just assume that there's a 50% chance of a clean sheet or something, then he's going to score 2 or 6
Hmm.
each week, which is the common trope for Edison. It's like, he doesn't get saves, he gets some clean sheets, 2 or 6. If he goes those 50% of the time each time, his average is 4.
Yeah.
But if you have him for one game week, you can't score 4. You score 2 or 6, so you're always wrong by
Yeah.
2 points. So it's like a probability distribution. So like, 4 is the average, but they overlap, and 2 or 6. Maybe someone has an average of 4 by having 0 or 8, and that's
Yeah.
different, even though the EV is the same. So as well as it being this snapshot in time, it's also a snapshot in the point in the probability distribution of what they might do.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And So regarding the sensitivity analysis, we have received a question. Ted Lasso Regen from Discord asked, "What is sensitivity analysis, and how did Johnny use it? Help him to do so well last season."
Uh, I mean, I feel like you're more qualified than me to talk about sensitivity analysis because I'm
I
basically
mean,
using your
yeah.
script. But very basically, it's just simulating these. So you take these point values for like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
well, we can fairly accurately guess the average
Mm-hmm.
and this kind of range of distribution. I think you and Trout looked at like how this probability distribution forms around this average. So like
Mm-hmm.
based on the amount of expected minutes, we can give a rough idea of the standard deviation. So how much it's going to like widen the curve or narrow the curve. So using that as like the noise, then we just simulate it and go, well, we'll simulate
Mm-hmm.
one run and go for the next however many game weeks, every player gets randomly placed according to this probability distribution function around their expected value. And then you use the optimizer to like go through and try and pick the best team. So the
Mm-hmm.
hindsight team given this simulation. And you run loads of 50, 100, however many. Maybe you try a few different. I'd often try and do it with like different settings. So if I up the free transfer value, if I want to be more prudent on my free transfers, this is another one where you're trying to break it. So like
Mm-hmm.
say the free transfer value suddenly becomes really high because some information we need to hold on to. Does this move still work, or have I been greedy here?
Mm-hmm.
So you mess with the decay base and this sort of thing, and you simulate, and you basically go like, who popped up the most, and that was normally like a good proxy for like this is a robust move. This happens in all these different scenarios. Whereas if you just simulate once, you do an optimization solve with one with the EV values, the average, then that's where you have that greediness that sometimes comes in. So it will take
Mm-hmm.
the one that's point 0.1 above, but actually in the probability distribution function, if that player ends up scoring below that, then you should have picked the other guy, and that
Yeah.
happens more often than not. So it kind of shows you like which players are more robust. So you simulate in the season basically.
Okay.
We have these averages, we simulate it, we see who's in the optimal team each time. Is sort of, I guess, a basic description of it.
Yeah. So my follow-up question is, suppose you're testing two different things. Like it could be like, what if fixture remains the same versus what if fixture gets another game, so that we will have a double game week here. How many times do you run the sensitivity analysis for each of these scenarios to have to get that good sense of, this is the percentages for every player? So do you run it like 10, 100?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the right answer to this is probably as many as you can.
Yeah.
Like if you can run it all day and all night, then more data, great. The more you get,
True.
the less likely you have to be wrong. But I think as a bare minimum of like this data would be valuable to me, I'd say like 30 to 50.
Mm,
Or I'd normally try and run it 50 times. I think for like if I was doing like a specific snapshot, I think 50 was. I mean, this is finger in the air stuff. This
yeah.
wasn't like I know after 50 sims that I have a 95% confidence rating in whatever. I just went, oh, 50 seems about right, and for you doing 10, it just feels like you might get it wrong. 50 seemed about right. 100 if I could. But yeah, there was some really good. I'm going to give some shout outs to Ed, SJFPL, and Spiros, who wrote these scripts. Because when I was first
Hmm.
doing it, I was probably only doing 10 because I was just doing it one by one. I was just doing one, saving the CSV file, writing it up, and then doing like 10. That would take like an hour to do 10.
Yeah.
And I'd manually count it up and go like, okay, but you still get a picture. You're still exploring. You're still kind of using this
Yeah.
window to see into reality. Whereas there are now some scripts that we've got in the solver that
Yeah.
like let you run 50 sort
Yeah.
of. You can run like 5 at a time and just have them run 10, and there's kind of running simultaneously and allows you to do them much quicker. So I think if I was like, oh, I would just want to test out like what if this fixture comes in? I'd try and run 50, and then I'd run it without 50. And also that meant if like there was a call on this fixture is either here or here, 50 of each is 100, and then it's easy. Like the percentages are just the occurrence out of 100. But it depends. I like it depends what you've got the capabilities to do. If you're using just the online version or FPL review or
Hmm.
doing it mentally yourself, then 10 to 20 would be enough to, as long as you understand the limitations. Like, I've only run 10 to 20. This isn't as likely to be accurate. If you run 10 or 20 and someone pops up 100% of the time, it's pretty unlikely that you shouldn't have them.
Yeah.
If you run 10 and someone's in half of them, then you're unsure. But if you run 50 and they're in half of them, then you go, okay, well, this is a 50-50 call.
Hmm.
Whereas you might run 10 and he's in half of them, and then you run another 20 or 30 and
Yeah.
he's in 80% or 20%. Like, the less you run, the more likely it is that, I guess, it's blurrier.
Yeah.
Your error bars are higher. 50 seemed like a ballpark number that I was running. For
So I
people who done
assume.
it themselves, that was
Mhm.
what I did. Uh, I don't know if that's why it worked or what. That's 50 seems to be a common one that people do. The round number.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was trying to run at least 40, because
Yeah.
central limit theorem and all that. But yeah, I think as many as you can probably is the right answer. So um, one thing that I was wondering is actually, yeah, before that, when I heard that people were using the sensitivity analysis manually, I felt really bad because I introduced it at one point and then I just completely gave up. And I used it myself, but for the
Right.
Python solver on the GitHub, I just left it there so that yeah, I'm glad Spyros came up with
Yeah. I
scripts so
mean,
that
I think sometimes that's been one of my strengths, is that I'm sometimes willing to put in this manual. I don't find it that boring. Obviously, it's much better that we can do it automated, but I'll quietly brute force something for, I don't know if
yeah,
that's just my mindset. I can do that.
yeah.
So I think that's why I was like, oh, what if I just brute force it? Sometimes that's my solution, because I don't know how to write the script to automate it. So I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, well, I could brute force it, so I'll do that.
Yeah. Yeah,
Whereas I think most people would go, well, that sounds stupid. I'm not doing that. So
yeah,
um,
different personalities, I guess.
yeah,
So then I also assume that you use sensitivity analysis obviously for your game week one squad and or maybe like wildcard squad, but do you also use it during a regular decision in a regular game week? Like
yeah,
suppose like it is like
sometimes,
we
yeah.
don't have any chance of double game weeks happening or something like that. Like for
I
example in
think
game week two this season, are you?
Yeah, I think I would still run. I remember running it at the start of the season. I made a bit of an odd call in game week 3 last season. I
Mhm.
sold Haaland after game week 2. I sold him for Kane,
Okay.
which let me go
That's a
Neto
very bold move, by the
gross.
way.
Yeah, didn't really work, but
Yeah,
I think I managed to sort of hang tight because everyone else I picked did really well. So
yeah.
everyone was like, "Oh, I captain Salah instead of Haaland for his 2 hat tricks," and I'm like, "I didn't own him." Well, I was, oh god, yeah.
That's an easier
But
decision
Kane was
then.
doing quite well, so actually Kane
Yeah, he did.
went under the radar a bit. So actually, I remember then I'd used some sensitivity analysis, and I think I took a bit of a gamble because I was like,
Yeah,
I wasn't so hot on Haaland's minutes. I thought he was going to be benched for one of the first 6 or 7,
yeah,
which was wrong in the end, but you don't know.
yeah. We didn't have any
Um,
way of
so I
knowing.
will
So,
still run it, and I think if it's close, it's definitely something I'll run.
mm,
If it's a week when, I guess, if I'm particularly busy, or the top move just looks so obvious, like it's so far clear that I'm pretty sure sensitivity analysis would show it up as the top move by a long way, then I don't always bother.
mm,
But if it's anywhere where I'm like, even just deciding between 2 moves, I will try and test them out if I've got time. But
yeah,
sometimes it's like, well, this player, I have one injured player and a very obvious candidate who's miles clear of everyone else. And then you go, well, that's clearly the move. Maybe
yeah,
you test it out and you want to like double check and you'd be more sure. But I guess once I'm sufficiently unsure is when I'll use it,
yeah,
which
yeah.
is actually quite often. I'm quite often unsure.
Nice.
Um,
Okay, awesome. Well, this was great talking about the last season. Let's talk about the new season a little bit.
yeah.
And Steely then Heatley asked, what's the optimal amount of weeks to project out your game week one team? are you already working on your game week 1 team?
I've done a few drafts, but I think there's so much that we can like change between now and the start. I mean, Onana just signed and everyone's brought him into their team, and someone else can sign, and Kane could leave. I don't know. Haaland gets injured,
That's true.
so I don't spend too long going like, is this the best team? Have I picked all the right players? But again, I'll do that kind of like scoping out the how if I drop Saka, who comes in? If I do this, how do things balance? How do things affect each other? And like tapping into that, poke the ecosystem and see what happens.
Yeah.
I think most models tend to project about 7 or 8 game weeks in advance. I know
Mhm.
some people had theirs like run over the whole season. A Kiwi used to have his just like it would run all the way through, and obviously you update it. It's not like
Mhm.
done. There we are. That's that's the point. Um, I think if you're too aggressive in like how many weeks you're targeting, then you can sometimes be forced into a wild card. And actually, wild carding quite early used to be quite a common thing. We'd even go like,
Mm.
"I'm planning to wild card in game week 3 or 4 or whatever." But I think there's an opportunity loss later on, and you're kind of going like, "I am forced to wild." If you go aggressive, it's unlikely your team is going to survive it longer term. If you go cautious, then you can still wildcard early on. You can still go, oh, I got everything wrong, and I think I've got an update to wildcard now. But you can survive. You can take over. And I think the loss of opportunity you have in those first few weeks by not going as aggressive is not as much as the opportunity that you would lose by having to wildcard early or having to put up with a suboptimal team and take hits early on. So I tend to err on the side of caution. We don't
Mhm.
actually really know very much before the season started.
Yeah.
So you're using the information to go, I want to use the information to value the early weeks heavily by attacking them. Whereas I think the information you have for later on, a few weeks in, is better, and I'd rather attack that later.
Yeah.
So if we think about the way we often put like decay on,
Mhm.
um, like valuing successive game weeks as being less important. And I think it might have been a few others have done it. Trout came up with like it's around 0.84, 0.85 roughly. Of
Mhm.
like game week 2 is about 80 to 85% as important as game week 1 in terms of valuating expected value. Which, if you use that, gives game week 8 at about 30%. I hope I've done my maths right. Someone's going to
Mhm.
correct me. Game week 8 is roughly 30% as important as game week 1. And game week 8 is accounting for like 5% of the total game week 1 to 8 with decay in. So that's kind of enough to kind of warrant, oh, well, it's going to maybe affect it, or it might be the difference change between like 1 or 2 players if they're really close. Like what's going on there is important. Whereas like game week 4 is like 60% is important,
Yeah.
roughly, with this metric. And game week 4 accounts for about 20% of the game week 1 to 4 total, which I think is too much to go like looking at the first 3 or 4 weeks and discounting game week 4 or 5. Like that's quite a big chunk of
Mhm.
importance. I think once you get to 8, 9, 10, then the percentages are like sufficiently small that you can cut it off, or you'll have changed by then. You'll have made 7 transfers by then, possibly even more. You might have wildcarded already. Like you don't know. You might not have to count that at all. So I think it's still important to weigh it in. So I think
Mhm.
7 or 8 is like 6 to 8 is ballpark what people seem to have settled on.
Yeah.
But it depends. Some people are talking about like wildcard 19 looking quite good. And I'm like, well, maybe, but you're not planning up to game week 19, are you? You're just saying like, I want to get through to game week 8 and be fine. So you're still thinking about it, but I think if you're only doing 3 or 4 weeks, I think you are overdoing it
Mhm.
in terms of aggressiveness. You can still have a couple of punts, but I'd say 6 to 8 is probably a sweet spot.
Okay. Awesome. And another question. Ross M from Discord asked, which players does JC ban from review? Do you ban injury prone players such as Reece James when you
Yeah, so we talk about banning all Everton players is a running joke, running theme that we have sometimes. So I don't actually ban anyone, I don't think. Um I'll more like tamper with their X minutes and be like, well, if Reece James is popping up quite a lot, like how low do I have to drop his expected minutes before he's not showing up?
Ah,
And
okay.
kind of find that like tipping point. So I guess I'll ban them if I'm like a lazy way of going like, well, I know I'm not having them.
Mhm.
So or maybe like I think there was one time where it's kind of like between James or Chilwell, or Luke Shaw like a week later. And maybe this was like game week 27, 28. And I was like, okay, so it's like James or Chilwell or Shaw a week after that. And I was like, actually, it was quite close. But if I kind of viewed it as like a Chelsea fullback or Luke Shaw,
Mhm.
then the Chelsea fullback was higher. So I was like, actually, if I ban Reece James, how many of those times does it just by Chilwell instead, and how many does it go to Shaw? And actually,
Yeah.
quite often it was picking Shaw, rather than just Chilwell or Shaw. Because the thing with the sensitivity analysis is it's just a count. You're just counting how often it picks up. So
Yeah.
actually, you want to toy with it and go like, okay, well, how are these interacting? Like maybe it's 50-50 Mbuemo and Matoma, and that
Mhm.
might be that you always have Mbuemo or Matoma, but never both.
Yeah.
Or it might be that like a quarter of the time you have both, a quarter of the time you have one, a quarter of the time you have the other, and a quarter of the
Mhm.
time you have none. So you kind of gotta like pick around with it. So I'll never really ban someone unless I'm doing like a shorthand. I prefer to like find that point that they drop out and go, do I think James's X minutes are higher or lower than this? Because if it's
Wow.
someone that's popping up that, maybe James is at like 65 X minutes and I like, oh, he's popping up even at 50 or 45, like I'd have to really consider it then and go like, well, even if James like only plays one of the double or gets injured in a couple of weeks, then like he's still telling me that it's the best pick. Then you can go, okay, well, I've tested this out. This is robust, even though James is like injury prone, might not
Mhm.
play. If he can manage one or two games of the next four, it's still putting him in. Then I'd probably put him in. But yeah, certainly there are players where I'd go like, I should just double check their
Yeah.
minutes, or like try and push them down, or um,
So
it's
no
more like
personal
it's like
biases.
it's like kind of again, it's like poking it and seeing what happens rather than going like, well, I'll just take that piece out. Um, Because sometimes he's on like 60 and you drop it down to 58 and he's gone, he's disappeared. And you're like, oh
Mhm.
well, clearly that was a very fragile pick. I should delete. But sometimes you like can push it quite far down and it still says, "Hey, I think you should still buy Reece James." So
Wow.
or
I
I can
should
play.
say, yeah, by the way, you're the most hardworking analytics manager I have ever met. Like
No.
people do and people use optimization or like analytics or numbers, they run numbers down, but the amount of work you do for this is just impressive.
Well, the
I like it.
computer's doing most of the work. I just
Well,
set it
yeah,
off
but
to
like
come back to it.
still,
But yeah,
I
all
mean.
right. I'll take it. Thank you.
So the next question is from our friend Hibo. He asked, "How do you feel about cheap benches like 3, 4 million and 1 4.5 million players? Is it viable or do they bleed expected value?"
I guess I can't comment necessarily on it whether they'll be the expected value because say players are underpriced and
Hmm.
the price isn't inherently how much expected value they're going to get. We've had players who were 4.0 who were playing all the time or out of position who were very good picks. Whereas, like, we've got three 4.0 defenders who might play. Two of them have just been given a blank game week 2 fixture, and one of them is supposedly not necessarily nailed. He was playing because of someone else being injured. So, like, we don't really have a 4.0 playing defender like we
Yeah.
used to get quite often. There'd be two or three, and you'd pick one and hope you got the right one. Whereas I think this time there probably isn't. Our 4.5 mids, we don't have an Andres Pereira. We don't have a 4.5 striker. I don't think we normally got those. Normally that was someone who was mispriced. I guess if Balogun moves, then he's one who would do that. But our 4.5 strikers were normally like Kane when he broke onto the scene rather than,
Hmm.
I don't know, a Lundstrom and Aaron Wan-Bissaka or someone like that. Or as Baldock and Bayer and Bell, I think the defenders. So I think it can be viable, but I think this time it probably is too fragile. I think that's something where like the opportunity cost of oh, my player's gonna miss a game but is back for the next game. or I don't really want to sell them, but like you're forced to. But then if you have two problems occur in game week 2 and your bench is this, then you
Yeah.
got to take a hit really, because you can't really play one of them, or you're losing out a lot by playing this 4.0 defender who might play. Whereas if you've got a bench, you can afford to go, okay, I'll deal with one of these now and one of these next week. So it's not just like rotating pieces for better fixtures, and people have often talked about rotating 4.5 defenders and that kind of thing, to like be slightly better than a 4.5 defender if you can pick the home games or the easy games. But you also lose the opportunity cost of, I have to fix this problem now, rather
Yeah.
than,
Yeah, that's
oh, I
true.
can just leave Reece James on the bench because they've got a really easy game week 3 fixture and I want him back for that because he might be back for that. I can afford to do that because I'm bringing Lewis Dunk off the bench or whatever. So I think it's one of the things that like solvers and models have kind of shown, of this like fundamental principle that some managers have held. Some of the fundamental principles that have been built up are quite effective, and actually, like there are things we overlook, like people say don't transfer your keeper out. Like keeper tend to have quite similar EV. That's often useful.
Yeah.
Doubles, it's important. Hits in doubles are more viable. -4 is -2, and not quite that, but there are inherent things that people have picked up that are right,
Yeah.
but we're not very good as humans at like spotting when we've picked up a false assumption. And actually sometimes that's where these computer programs or solvers can like point them out to us. And I think I was watching a documentary about the history of chess on
Hmm.
Netflix. I watched it a while ago. I think I wrote a really short thread on it back when I first started Twitter, but I wanted to watch it again just to check it, because it talks about this. Like chess is much simpler. Chess is like 64. I mean, it's still complicated, but like there's
Hmm.
64 squares. There's, what, I don't know, 18, 16 pieces each. So there's like a finite number of moves and things you can do. But
Hmm.
chess started in this like, they call it the romantic era. I'm sure
Yeah.
someone who knows chess more than I do, rather than watching one documentary and playing a little bit, is going to correct me. But it started in this like romantic era. You attack at will. You're meant to just gung ho, take whatever, artistic expressionism, and that was kind of the era that a lot of it started. I mean, it started ages ago. This is like more
Yeah.
recent. And then the scientific school came in, and people were like finding these fundamental principles, and like we want to control the center and get our powerful pieces more active, and opening moves. There's like opening theory. There's like things called book moves, which is like, in this scenario, we've studied this scenario enough that like this is the best move. We just know
Hmm.
it. You don't have to think about it. Just that's the move. Do the book move, unless you're doing something crazy. So it was like this more realistic expressionism turned into realism. And then came along what they called the hypermodernists, which was this age of like rebellion and surrealist art and people imagining these impossibilities, and people going like, oh well, what actually if we break it? And actually supercomputers then came in and were able to kind of play based on all the human data and go like, okay, well, we can use a bit of this and use a bit of that. And then the next one that came along was Alpha Zero, which was like zero prior human knowledge. They just got taught the rules and told to play itself. So it doesn't have this concept, this emotional concept of like, oh, I don't want to lose my queen, so I'll try and protect it. And this emotional coming into decision making, because the computers before were based on human games, whereas this was just learning. And it would do these like crazy moves sometimes. But actually, because it didn't have that inhibition to go like, oh, maybe I shouldn't do that, or we've got this principle that we shouldn't do that, it would show people, and actually, grandmasters were learning from things that Alpha Zero is doing,
Hmm.
because it's like, oh, it's doing this strategy in this scenario, and actually it works out, and we go, oh, well, maybe we had a wrong assumption, or this is the exception to the rule, or that sort of thing. So I think a strong rotating bench is probably the thing that I would think actually goes against the common intuition of
Hmm.
putting money in the front, the first 11, which maybe that was a viable strategy before, different scenarios. We had cheaper bench options available. I think more recently, like having these rotating pieces is something that the solvers tend to show as being more optimal, to
Yeah.
annoy a few people with the term. So actually, it's going, okay, well, the computer can try this out, and it often picks a stronger bench. You can have, a 4.5 striker. My draft I've got in a minute, like I've got a non-playing guy. But I think if you've got 2 to 3 non-playing guys and no backup keeper, like you're running too much of a risk there,
Yeah.
personally.
Yeah.
Not just in terms of not being able to rotate players in and out, but also in terms of if things go wrong, you're a bit stuck. You're forced to do things rather than being able to choose which piece to attack, which way to move.
Yeah. Yeah, you're completely right on this. I mean, when we were running the hindsight optimization, or I should say the re-optimization competition, the notion was like how much percentage weight should be given to bench players so
Mhm.
that you come up at the very best in terms of FPL outcomes, not the projected points. And people submitted different values. We have tried various stuff, and it showed us like maybe like 20% for your first bench player, and then around 6% for your second bench, and then the third bench player, outfield bench player, obviously, is 0.3 or something. So that's the only dead spot Solver usually keeps. Sometimes Solver keeps a dead, bench player and keeps him there, but usually rotates because 20% is quite a big chunk of EV that you can rotate. And even if you don't rotate anyone, so just because of the probability of auto sub or like some other stuff that you might need this guy, like even if you didn't plan it, so 20% is giving, like, even if you try to fix bench players, you say that I will have bench players and I will fix them through the horizon. It is still giving you a good first bench player because
Yeah.
the solver knows that it will come handy. And what we wonder the most, do you have a draft already? I asked this, but can you talk us about your picks and why you pick these players?
Yes, I have a draft because it was requested. I did actually look and actually went and saw like the players I had in my team weren't dissimilar to the draft I ended on. So I think I send you the photo bring up on screen. Let me
Okay,
just
let me
bring it out.
also.
So I'll read it out for the audio listeners.
Hmm.
We'll start with everyone's favorite, Edison in goal. The
Ederson
best
M
pick,
this season,
yeah,
actually.
Edison M, Edison M. I've gone for Gabriel from Arsenal.
Hmm.
I've put Ruben Dias in at the minute, but that's kind of just any City player. Like we're far enough out that I think one of them, or at least one of them, will be like viable enough that they should play. And
Hmm.
again, strong bench, so I can deal with them not playing. So Man City defender. I've also gone Estupinan,
He's very
but I've
popular.
got Dunk on the bench as well. So I think I've put both of them in. But again, like I mean, I guess if Webster's like starting, I think they've just signed a new centre back, so
Contract.
maybe not.
Center.
But he's like 4.5, so I could say 4.5 and go there. But anyway, so Edison, Gabriel, Ruben, Diaz, Estupinan, Rashford, Bruno Fernandes, Saka, Mbuemo, and Mitoma. So 5 men in the field.
Hmm.
And then Haaland, obviously, and Gabriel Jesus. And then the bench is just 4.0 keeper. I've got Areola in at the minute, but I think Hennessy maybe, or I don't know, just anyone. Fraser Forster. I don't know if we'll get one who's playing, but
Yeah.
currently just whoever. Very important. And then I've got Dunk, and I've put Ethan Pinnock in at the minute. And the most important of all, I've got Huang Uijo as my 4.5 striker. Who? What did I looked it up? He got Korean FA Goal of the Year in 2019,
Oh,
and
okay.
a prize formerly won by Heung-min Son. So um, I don't think he's going to play, but I remember we spent a lot of time. People made transfers on their 4.5 striker last season, so it's very important to get that one right, I think.
Yeah.
And I've got a good feeling about Huang Weizhou from Forest. But yeah, it kind of sets up in like a 3-5-2. Although as Diltsey would say, formations are dead. It's not static. But I think that front is. I mean, it's triple Arsenal,
Yeah.
triple City, 2 Man United, and then you just rotate. You've got 3 Brighton and 2 Brentford to just rotate around. So I think the fact that you can get 8 players from the top 3 teams and some very viable upper, lower upper mid table, lower top half teams to rotate. I guess it just shows what you can do with the money. So Yeah, the big questions are like no Salah, Salah no
Yeah.
Salah, or Trent no Trent. I think that kind of like determines the structure of the team
Yeah, that's
because
true.
things follow on from there. So how many 8.5 to 9.0 mids are you going to have from there? Um, how many 4.0 defenders do you need? 4.5 defenders. So currently I've got neither. But I'm not wedded to that. I think that's just at the minute. I think the big one about Salah is the EV loss for not captaining him in game week 2.
Game week 2. Yeah.
But I think if you look at Salah versus the 8.5 mids and Jesus, that kind of like mid price bracket. So
Mhm.
Rashford, Bruno, Saka, Jesus, Odegaard, Martinelli, whoever, Son, probably not Son, but that chunk. I think game week 1 and game week 3 they're probably going to be pretty similar
Yeah.
expected value wise, or certainly that's what the ensemble models are kind of roughly showing at the minute. And I think you're probably going to lose 1 to 1.5 EV on captaincy from Haaland to Salah. So it's
Mhm.
whether you, but that's just in game week 2. So like
Yeah.
you can kind of match Salah in 1 and 3. I think it might be 4 and 5 or 6. Salah's like a bit ahead, but I think what it allows you to do is it allows you to have 4 of those players rather than 1
Yeah.
with you'd probably have Salah because the swap is probably like Saka and Jesus out to Salah and another dud. But I think quite often when I was running the solves preliminary stuff, then like it quite like selling Salah in game week 3, even when you started with him.
Yeah. I was going
Um,
to say that.
yeah, so these like 4 midfielders or 4 attackers who are in this like mid-price bracket, whatever we want to call mid-price 8 to 9 bracket. Um, I think Jesus I've preferred because um, it just allows you to have these like 3 other mids, and actually you're not stuck with just Haaland and 2 4.5s. I don't think there's really many strikers below that range that we're confident about. Calvert
Yeah.
Lewin looks really appealing. Visser maybe, but it depends who's playing. And Kunku I really like, but I don't feel confident enough about him. Like I think Nkunku and Sterling are the kind of players I'd like to like hop on. I think if you start with them, I'm not set on this. It's obviously just sensations at the minute, but like if you start with them and it goes wrong, I think you're a bit stuck. Like you that's the guy you got to move out. Whereas if you start without them, then you can pick whichever of your like 5 midfielders is not working to bring them in.
Mhm.
So you've got that flexibility of like, oh, I can hop on them from wherever. Whereas if I have a problem with one of the other 4 midfielders and Sterling, then I've got 2 problems. Where rather than being able to like pick Sterling up as a solution, or Nkunku as well. But I think they're both very good options. I like people who are starting with them as a punt, but I think I'm just probably gonna pass. I think, and then like Watkins and Callum Wilson and that kind of thing. I think they're
Mhm.
both really good
Mhm.
options, but I think again it's probably someone where I'd favour the early fixtures of Jesus. And maybe that's someone who come in later, but again, they're viable off ramps if Jesus is starting to miss some minutes because Havertz is playing 9 or whatever. I don't know, or even Martinelli or Trossard.
Yeah. Mhm.
If Jesus isn't looking as nailed, then could always swap him out to Watkins or Wilson. I think that's still good, even though the fixtures aren't so good. And then defense, like there's Trent at 8, and there's Trippier at 6.5. And then there's a couple of 5.5s. I've put DS in at the minute, but like Shaw and Reece James, Chilwell, the other ones as well. Like they're ones I can hop onto. But there's so many like 5.0 defenders and 4.5 defenders that I think kind of filling your defense with those and swapping them around is probably going to be the best route. Or actually, like that's kind of what I'm happy on at the minute. And Edison is the best in the world. No, I mean I had the budget for him, and I think he was unfairly treated last season. I think he was
Yeah.
unfortunate, and actually, like I think 3 of the 4 seasons leading up to that, like season long, he was like top 2 or 3 keepers, but
Yeah.
he doesn't do any. He doesn't hit anything massive normally. He does just tick along, but City would average like 18 to 20 clean sheets a season.
Yeah.
So like, that is that 50% mark that we were talking about. Like he's gonna get you don't know. And actually like even starting last season, I think I had him for the first 7 game weeks and he got there was no 7th game week fixture, was it? But
Yeah.
the first 6 games, I think he got 3 clean sheets. So that's
Hmm.
what he was expecting. I had him for 6 games, got 3 clean sheets. That was fine. Maybe, there would have been a 4.5 keeper who did better, but I don't know which one that is.
Yeah.
And you
Exactly.
do run the risk. Like City, there is some truth in they concede late on, having kind of won the game already. But I think there was too much made of that when they'd give away half a chance and it would get scored. Damari Gray just banging it. You can't bank on that happening every time.
It's true.
So I don't know. I quite like Flecken as well. If Raya moves on,
Yeah.
or even Fabianski, you go Fabianski Areola, and then you've got a keeper for 9.5 between
Hmm.
the two of them. So don't know. Yeah, I mean that's where we
Yeah.
are at the minute.
Awesome.
What are your
Yeah, this
thoughts
is a
on
pretty good team. Yeah. So one thing I'm wondering is then to build this kind of a draft when you're running the solver, are you kind of forcing solver not to use any transfers, like not to plan anything, or is it more like you're running sensitivity and hoping that you will end up with a very robust team that you probably won't need any transfers? So what I'm asking is, do you actually book transfers?
I don't book any in. I think what some people do is they say tell the solver you've only got 3 transfers to make.
Hmm.
I think what I prefer to do is move the free transfer value up. If I think it's too fragile or it's booking too many transfers in, then I'll just move the free transfer value up and see if it's still doing that. Because
Yeah.
if you raise the free transfer value to 2.5 and it still does all these moves, then you can probably book them in because they're probably
Yeah.
pretty good moves. If you raised it to 4 and it was still doing all these moves, then you might as well book them in because at worst it's worth
Worth
4
the
points.
hit.
It's
Yeah.
unlikely. Often they're not worth 4 points
Yeah.
unless it's doubles. But I think if you raise it and go, okay, just you can make as many as you want, but bear in mind that they're valuable. I'll give you a bit
Hmm.
more value. So I was just using the default value to start with here. I've not upped
Okay.
it too much. And I normally say don't make transfers in the last couple of weeks. Don't dead end because then it'll kind of if you're trying to tell it what to think, don't think game week 8 is the end of the season.
Yeah.
So we often say, no transfers last 1 or 2 game weeks.
Hmm.
But normally, yeah, I think this was basically just from running default free transfer value, default horizon over
Yeah.
18 weeks and mixed model. I think I had a very similar team to this already. I didn't have Diaz. I had Henry instead of Pinnock,
Hmm. Hmm.
and I'd put Sasa Kalajic in instead of Wejo because I I must have thought he might be playing at some point. So actually, I already had this set
Yeah.
up from a while ago,
Same
but
structure.
that's probably
Yeah.
just what I'd landed on rather than what I decided was right. And even now, this might be nowhere near what we pick
Yeah. Yeah.
from the start of the season. But I think, yeah, I ran some solves. I gave a sufficiently high free transfer value that you're incentivized not to use them, but if it's valuable, then you shouldn't tell it not to do something valuable.
Yeah.
If there are 4 transfers in the horizon that are worth more than 4 points, and you say you've only got 3 transfers, you're gonna miss out on that. It seems unlikely, but I'd rather say transfers are really valuable, and if it
Hmm.
still says use loads, take some hits, then you go, oh well, hits must be viable here, rather than saying you can't make more than this many, and then
Yeah.
it doesn't take the hit that you probably should have taken. But early on, I don't think hits are valid in the first 8 game weeks unless you're scuppered, in which case probably wild card.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Wow. Awesome. So then my last question is, well, we have a wide variety. We have a wide variety of audience when it comes to background and using analytics. So, what would be your advice to players who are discovering the analytics side of FPL for the first time? Because it's a common question, and I want to ask, the number one manager in this. So, what, like, your friend came to you, he said, I don't know anything about analytics in FPL, and I want to, you know, get into action. So, what would you recommend?
Um, this podcast. Uh,
Thank you.
yeah, I mean, there's lots of sites out there that produce models. So I think
Hmm.
most of us use FPL Review. Mikhail Tokvam's algorithm is also really good. I think those are the ones whose models stood the test of testing that we'd done last year. They're all sufficiently good. If you're going to use any model, then the ones that are publicly available are all pretty good. I think the ones that come from Scout and Hub and Fix and Drafthound and FPL Teams got his own one now as well. Maybe not Teams. So they're Scout and Hub, their websites for everything. They have articles on them. They have tools on them. It's not just here's the model and here's the data.
Hmm.
So I'd encourage you to try and build your how do you think a model might work? Try and build
Hmm.
your own one. It doesn't have to be any good.
Yeah.
It does. You go. I'm not going to use this model. I'm going to use someone else's. But try and go. Even if you're not looking at data online and going I'm going to try and predict clean sheet rates by taking the average number of shots a team is receiving and the non-penalty expected goals
Hmm.
per shot, and use a binomial distribution and all sort. You don't have to do complicated stuff like that. You can just go
Yeah.
I've looked at the tables and City are getting this many clean sheets over the last 4 seasons roughly. So I reckon they're going to get 15 to 20 this season. And maybe you could even go I think they're going to have them in these games, or
Yeah.
likelihood in these games. But if you're going, I think City are going to get 20 clean sheets, and you look at each game and you give them a 30 to 40% chance each time, that's not matching up with how many clean sheets you think they're going
Yeah.
to get. So it's making sure that each week kind of at least adds up to the total.
Yes.
So
Hmm.
you can layer on more and more, and this is kind of how my model started, and kind of why it got stuck is because it got quite Frankenstein. It was here's a really basic model. I know what's not in it. I hadn't put pens in yet, so I was I know that if Bruno and Rashford are level, then actually Bruno's ahead because I've not put the pens in. Well,
Yeah.
assuming Bruno's on pen, but you can mentally make the adjustments. So you go
Hmm.
really simply, I think that Haaland's going to score this many goals. I think Salah's going to score this many goals. I think that being at home, well, home advantage has kind of been calculated roughly at how much it's
Yeah.
worth, depending on goals for and goals against. But you can assign a home advantage each time. You can go you could even just go this is the base rate. This player is going to score zero point 0.4 of a goal on average each game, based on how many goals I think they're going to score.
Hmm.
If I give zero point 0.4 of a goal each game and give them this many points, and they're going to get this many assists, and I think that they often get this share of bonus, you can add them up, and you can already go oh, Saka's better than Mbomo, or but you know how much better they are. You kind of quantified it. Your error bars are still quite high, but you can
Yeah.
work things out there.
Yeah.
And I think you then get an understanding of what the modeling's actually doing,
Yeah.
rather than just looking at well, 6 is bigger than 5, I'll pick that player.
Yeah.
You're well, what's behind it? And actually, all models are imperfect.
Yeah.
There is no perfect model. You're adding layers in to reduce your error rate. So if you can make a high error rate model, then you know what you've put in it. So you go, okay, well, I can interpret this because I know what's in it.
Yeah.
I know what's in this sausage. So you know what mentally you can adjust for. Whereas when you are using someone else's model, we don't really know what review's putting in it. We always speculate about a player's EV moving down when they're moving out of position, or this other
Yeah.
player's injured, and we'll try and make mental adjustments on it. A lot of people will go well, I think Salah should be higher than that, or
Yeah.
whatever. But there's more in it than most people think, for one. But we don't know how much to mentally adjust because we don't know what's in it. Whereas if you make your own one, it might be much more error prone, but you know how much to mentally adjust the
Yeah.
bits you haven't put in.
Hmm.
So I think, and then you can get an understanding of why a solver might try and take a hit here, or why a hit normally isn't here, because you go, oh, well, even though I think this player's a bit meh, or they're playing Man City away, then I know that their base rate of goals is this. And if they're on the lower end, they're still going to score some points.
Hmm.
So to hit for a better player, they've got to score 4 more points on average for it to work. So that's quite a lot in one game week.
Yeah.
So even I don't know, Ollie Watkins playing away to Man City and Wilson playing at home to Luton,
Hmm.
that's probably not worth. Like, they're similar standard players. They're going to have similar outputs. One's playing a really hard team. One's playing a really easy team. Maybe it comes out over the long term, but in that single week, it's unlikely that, unless Watkins isn't playing, that the hit's going to be worth it.
Yeah.
And in these blank weeks, we can roughly get an idea of who's going to score more than 4 points. So should be worth getting a hit over a blank player.
Yeah.
So I think just understanding the limitations of the modeling and actually what's going on, I think trying it yourself is one of the things that I learned the most from.
Yeah.
But just kind of being open to it and going like, well, there's something to learn from this. Like, everyone can learn from this. Even I'm learning stuff all the time. Like, I don't know I haven't solved it. I haven't fixed it. Um, so, and there are a lot. If you're shut, like, I'm not, data's ruining the game, I'm not going to learn from it. Then you're not going to improve. And there's a bit of a like, I mean, like, keep it fun. Like, if you find scouring through all this data and building the model and kind of seeing how things come together boring, and you'd rather just pick, then do that. Like, you don't have
Hmm.
to play this way. But
Yeah.
also, if someone is playing this way, like, I find this fun. I think people say like you shouldn't do this, and no one really says that, but data's breaking the game, data's doing this, that, and the other, and I'm like, well, I'm just playing a different game. I'm just enjoying this way. I think I'd really like FPL to kind of like have these different leagues that you can enter. So these restrictions. A few of us play a few mini games where like
Hmm.
you play with a 90 million budget, or a few guys played without Haaland last season, and that's just good fun. And that's just another sort of puzzle for us to try and solve and
Yeah.
think in a different way. So again, this data is just helping you think in a different way. Use it as a tool. Try and play around with it yourself and see what you can come up with. And I, unusual learnings come from random places. You listener, hello, you could have the next big breakthrough in FPL analytics just by trying something that no one's thought of before, because we're entrenched in our ideas. Like, we want new people to be trying things out, and that's where sensitivity analysis came from, was like this idea that a few people had and going, actually, like, there's a limitation. What if we solved it this way? So there's already limitations in what we use now, and people are already coming up with interesting ways to try and solve them.
Yeah.
So it's a puzzle. Like, that's kind of what FPL is. It's also about a sport that people are really involved in.
True.
So I
True.
try and see them separately. I see, like, we have a maths puzzle that I like to play, and it's super interesting because the bits in the maths problem are football.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
If it was the same numbers, but it was, I don't know, finances or something, I'm not interested as much. And it means that I can take the result of my maths puzzle and go and watch the football and go, the player I think my puzzle has scored, that's brilliant,
Yeah.
rather than like it inherently defining me as a person or my decision making or my understanding of football.
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
guess that was a bit rambly, but
No, it was
have
great.
fun with it. Have a play.
Yeah. Awesome answer. Well, well, there you have it, folks. The treasure of knowledge shared by the MD winner champion, Jonny Currie. I hope you are all as inspired as I am by Johnny's amazing season and advice, and also just how hardworking he is. Before we wrap up the episode, let's recap some of the key takeaways from today's episode. So Johnny, well, finished number one in MD ranking. So we were just curious about how he did it. He mentioned about using sensitivity analysis on top of optimization, and he talked about, actually he talked lots of things on this, but trying different combinations, different structures, different parameter values, sometimes different fixtures, so that he can get a better sense of which squads are more robust and which ones work better, like structurally. And he also mentioned that he plays with the expected minutes too. That's right, right? I'm not making it up.
I think I more so play with them to like test and try and break it,
Yeah.
rather than some people have a much better intuitive understanding of like, this player's going to play, this player's not going to play.
Hmm.
I don't back myself to do that very well.
Hmm.
So I'll tinker with them and see what happens, but I'm not like I know expected minutes better than other people, which some people do. Some people know it really well.
Mhm.
Um,
Awesome. And Johnny also mentioned about actually, like, as an advice to new people to the analytics, trying their own maybe models, or at least playing with the numbers and data to get a better sense of what models are trying to do and how they are useful, and also get a sense of how fragile they can be if you have a very rough model. And anything else you want to add, Johnny?
um, I don't think so. Just
Yeah.
good luck everyone for the new season. Um, yeah, I'm looking
Yeah.
forward to it.
Yeah.
I'm
Good
getting
luck
quite
to you
excited now. I
too.
think, yeah, it's starting to pique my interest. I think a bit before when the prices dropped, we were a bit like, oh well, what are we doing now? But there are problems to solve. There's always stuff to do. I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to it. So good luck, everyone.
Yeah. Thank
But
you.
don't beat me.
Yeah. And thank you to all our fantastic listeners for tuning in again. Remember, as you gear up for the new season, this could be a great season to try some analytics and optimization because we still have time until the season starts. And that's it for today's episode. Until next time, stay curious and stay analytical.